Well, welcome to our webinar on 12 shocking consequences of the 2018 election. In this webinar, you'll be able to go ahead and send me some questions, and I'll get back to you either on this webinar or afterwards. You can always email me. And I'm really glad that you decided to tune in, because what we're going to be seeing in the next 2 years is so consequential. And the fact is, I've been flooded with emails. What happened? What will happen in the next 2 years? What will happen in 2018? Because the consequences are huge. And the fact is that the outcome of this election shocked many people. I got an email from Shannon. She said, "We listen, go and do what is right," and seem to get kicked out and kicked in the teeth for it. Email after email, I don't quite understand what took place. And then when the news was talking about ballot harvesting, oh, it's a fraud. And I sent out an email, and many of you who are listening responded back to that email poll, giving me what you thought was the reason that conservatives and libertarians and Republicans took such a hit. Why was there this blue wave, this blue tsunami that took place? After the election, I've already been giving speeches on what happened after the election. People were calling me saying, "Hey, I want you to come to my club. I want you to explain what happened," because they can't quite understand what took place. And candidates for 2020, pastors have called me, "What happened?" And as many of you know, I own an ad agency, and I've got clients throughout the world. And when we do a campaign for a client, after each campaign, we do a post-mortem. And number one, we say, what went right? What went wrong? And two, what needs to happen next? And so in this next hour, I'm going to take a look at what happened and what needs to happen. I'm going to tell you information you won't hear anywhere else. I'm going to give you insights of things that happened that you won't see in social media, on the news, and a lot of misinformation out there. So what we're going to do, we're going to give you the tools you will need to know not only what's happening, but how we can change the next year and next 2 year, so that instead of there being a surprise that the progressives win, let there be a surprise that conservatives and libertarians and people with a Christian worldview win. The media distorts what's happened. The social media doesn't get it. The consultants, the professional consultants, they're doing a blame shifting, and they get it all wrong. Many get it just plain wrong. It's not just voter fraud, though there may be a little voter fraud. It's not just this ballot harvesting, though we need to talk about it. It's not the media bias, so that's part of it. It's not what's happened with entertainers or with schools, so that's part of it. It's a lot more. It's a lot deeper. And so let's take a look at what it is. There was a blue wave, but you probably could call it a tsunami. And so what happened? What do we do about it? With the blue wave, there are a lot of people are patting the Republicans on the back, that Republicans were able to win the U.S. Senate. In fact, increase their margin so that if there's a couple of liberal or moderate Republicans who don't go along with a conservative plan or a conservative judge, we have extra votes. That's awesome. But here's what's happened. The fact is that some really good candidates lost. The fact is that some people that should have won did not win. The fact is that in the Senate, where we should have wiped out any progressive liberal opponent, it's the conservative libertarian that barely squeaked by, barely made it. In Congress, we were wiped out. In many governor seats were, like Scott Walker in Wisconsin, wiped out. Statewide offices for different officials like secretaries of state, like attorney generals, or the assembly and state senators of different states, conservatives, libertarians were wiped out. Propositions didn't go the way we wanted them to. Many of the local elections didn't go. In those states that had judges, the progressive, the judicial activists, they won. So what happened? In the House, the Democrats have taken over. Now, we get down to Republican or Democrat. They both have messed up. So we're not so much talking about party, but let's be honest. The fact is the Republicans have been carrying the principles for freedom, the principles for economic growth, the principles for protecting religious liberty. And that all shifted. That all changed. With now about 235 House members that are Democrats controlling the House. 47 Democrats are in the Senate, 53 Republicans. Governors, 23 Democrats now. They're gaining as far as the number of governors in the Democratic states. What about the state offices? It was that the Republicans dominated. Now the Democrats dominate. And the fact is this was a bad election. Well, here's the dirty little secret. That's not the way an election like that should be. We should have won significantly. Ted Cruz should have really won without any problems. When we talk about Rick Scott in Florida, he should have won without any problems. When we talk about Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, many people are rejoicing and glad. But you know what? She should have won by a wide margin, not by the very little bit she did. And some, like Bob Menendez, a progressive Democrat that's corrupt in New Jersey, he should have lost. In Nevada, we should have won. Arizona, we should have won. But we lost. Why did this happen? How could it have happened? And the propositions in California, they had a proposition to roll back an unfair gas tax. That lost. In rent control in California, it actually did go the right way. We didn't get rent control in California. In Alabama, they voted to allow the 10 Commandments on public property. That's right. And they also had more pro-life protections. That's right. In Arizona, school choice lost. In Massachusetts, gender identity, that passed. In Oregon, no tax funding for abortion, that lost. So it was kind of a mixed bag on the different propositions, but the propositions largely followed what the vote was for governor and senators. And what happened was a progressive wave. So this blue wave even affected the judges. So as an example, in California, most of the judicial activists held on to their seats. And even though in the primary, a number of constructionists got into the race, they lost when it was the general election. And what happened across the United States was there was erosion, especially in the suburban voters. And there's a reason for that. The progressives got some 49% of the vote, and conservatives got much less. In Denver to Atlanta, Salt Lake City to McLean, Virginia, the GOP incumbents lost. Those, you don't beat a sitting congressman. They lost the race. And it was these suburban voters. And so Arizona, Nevada, Texas, South Carolina, Tennessee were all seeing all of a sudden this surge in voting for progressive candidates. And they say, and the big thing was, of course, the issue of the health care, and with the health care, the pre-existing conditions. And of course, so much of that has to do with conservatives and Republicans who have failed to take that health care issue on, have failed to be able to give the alternatives and give confidence to those people who have been signed up into Obamacare, those people who are suffering because of some of the inconsistencies caused by government regulation in the healthcare, instead of being advocates for freeing our healthcare system and creating competition and lowering prices. And with drugs and everything else, the Republicans have basically ignored the issue. And the issue of the pre-existing conditions, well, Nancy Pelosi said, why did the Democrats win? Healthcare, 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 she said. There were 3 reasons. Healthcare. And half of the TV ads, $90 million, was spent on healthcare. The other one had to do with the tax cuts and not the positioning that this tax cuts helped create jobs, helped raise wages. It was unfair tax cuts. And so those were 2 of the issues. And what was the motivation? What caused so many people to get so involved in politics, many who had never been involved before, to become part of this 2018 campaign? Well, it was the anti-Trump invigorated volunteer base. A lot of paid people, but most are volunteers. And they were motivated by this anti-Trump fever. So you combine those top issues, you combine the motivation, and then you have the strategy and tactics that put it together. You see, they would not have won just on the healthcare issue. They would not have won simply because of anti-Trump. They won because of this formula. And I'm going to mention this formula a number of times. You see, to win an election, you have to have enough money. You don't have to have more money than your opponent. You have to have enough money. You have to have targeted digital marketing that's done smart. And then you add to that an organized GOTV. GOTV stands for Get Out the Vote. So an organized effort to get people to the polls. That gives you victory. The progressives followed that strategy. The Republicans, the conservatives, they ignored that strategy and they lost. What are the consequences of this? Well, in the Senate, we can rejoice because with the Senate, one of the greatest things that Trump has done has been to appoint conservative judges, not just to the U.S. Supreme Court. We have 2 now, 2 strict constructionists who will not legislate from the bench, but make right constitutional decisions. They'll base it upon the Constitution, not upon their personal opinion. But that's also the case with the lower courts. And the lower courts are now shifting dramatically. And with the fact that we have 53 solid votes to get a person nominated to the U.S. Senate or to a cabinet position, this Senate race was great. We can rejoice in it, but we barely squeaked by. And what are the consequences in the House of Representatives? The consequences in the House of Representatives are horrific. It will be investigate, investigate, and investigate. The news, the social media is going to be dominated by one investigation after another. I can tell you that the White House, the cabinets, all the different people who are doing anything positive are going to be called before Congress to give testimony, knocked down, torn down, slandered in such ways that the head's going to spin. How anybody could be operating in Washington, D.C. for the next 2 years with what's going to happen starting in January, it's going to be insane. And this is because of the failure of the Republican Party and the Republican establishment and conservatives, and yes, of pastors and the church vote were at fault in what happened here, and that the House was lost. What about state legislation? Throughout the U.S., there was this blue wave that took place. Wisconsin, for example, you've got a whole situation where governors lost, where state offices were lost, and state legislators were lost. Why is that important? Because of redistricting. You see, in the 2020 election, all the districts are going to be redone. Districts for Congress, districts for state Senate, districts for Assembly. And it's going to be the legislature, or those appointed by the legislature, that are going to make these decisions. And that's huge. A little gerrymandering can create a one-party state. And the progressives want it to be a one-party progressive state. And they're going to do everything they can to make these elections unfair. And we lost the advantage. And this is going to be one of the biggest battles yet. And then in regards to advocacy of, it says sociable, advocacy of socialism. Never before were we ever have seen in U.S. history so many candidates who basically are advocating socialism and admitting that socialism, not just Bernie Sanders, not just Elizabeth Warren, but these new candidates. It's advocacy for statism and collectivism. It's advocacy for making government the God and politics the religion. And that all solutions to human society are based upon the government stepping in and doing things instead of the individual. So this fight against freedom, fight against the individual is now underway as never before because of this election. So what about higher debt? We're going to see that the debt, not only in the state level, but nationally, is going to continue without trying to get it under control, which is going to lead to economic problems down the road. It's going to lead to inflation. We were fighting hard and close to having another tax break, which would have spurred the economy like you can't believe. As a business owner, I can tell you, I see the clients, I see my prospects, I see companies doing things they haven't done for years because of the optimism that they can operate and know that there's going to be tax stability and they're going to be able to keep some of what they earn. For the individual, for companies, that's not going to happen for tax cut number 2. The regulations have probably had more impact on spurring the economy on, but that's going to be completely under attack now. And then we got the deep state corruption, and that's going to escalate. The fact is that the deep state corruption was being uncovered. It was being exposed. Light was shined into the darkness. Now the swamp is going to be able to cover up its misdeeds. The swamp is going to be able to hide what it's done. The fact that there has been such an abuse of power now is going to be covered up. And so, I'm going to be talking about the deep state a little bit later. I'm going to be also having another webinar on that. But that has had a setback on trying to expose the deep state corruption and abuse of power. And number 7, government cover-ups all over that go on. They're now going to be things that won't be exposed. For the last 2 years, this has been a time where protection of religious liberty has been at an all-time high. Protection of life, all-time high. What has happened in the last 2 years to give people of faith protection has been historic. But now we have a setback. Now we have a situation where we can't get anything passed in the Congress. And then we have some great candidates who were in the state legislature, who could easily have run for Congress or Senate or governor or maybe president. They lost. We have some candidates that could have helped influence people. They lost. And then there's this accelerated and energized training by the progressive left. This energized and accelerated training of how to organize and how to market and how to win an election. This is something that now is going to be a major problem because they have learned what to do. Now they can perfect it. What about Republicans? What about conservatives? They're being left in the dust. And that's mainly what I'm going to address in the next few minutes. And then there's been a disturbing trend. We see it in New York. We see it in New Jersey. We see it in California. We see it in Illinois. That the business money has been drying up going to Republicans. So the real estate, the construction industry, the manufacturers, all these different business groups are giving massive amounts of money to the Democrats. Why? Because Republicans have become, in many states, irrelevant. They don't need to give money to the Republicans. The Republicans have no power. They have no influence. What they need to do is to give money to Democrats to try to lessen the harm or to help in their protection against competition. It's become very corrupt, but the fact is the business money, which you would expect to be at least be equal, is now going to accelerate to the Democrats. They're going to have more money from the business community. And finally, GOP must win back California House seats to control the 2020 House. Even if in 2020 a conservative wins the presidency, the House, we've lost so many seats here in California and so many seats nationwide, it would be virtually impossible to win back the House for the Republicans unless they can win back California seats. Now, this becomes very complex and confusing with the upcoming redistricting that's going to be going on. But the fact is that California has to come back, and if the GOP is going to regain the House, and we'll address that issue. So against all odds, what happened? Why did it happen? And I think the starting point of determining how it happened, why it happened, is looking back. You know, after Trump was able to win the primary, he basically had no ground game operation in place. He had little staff. And there were all these never Trumpers. He had fundraising nightmares. And it was just crazy. But somehow, in some of these key states, he barely squeaked out a victory, whether it be Wisconsin, Florida, North Carolina. These states came were as a surprise and a shock, and he was able to win the race. And so how did that happen? What was it? What was it that caused the elections to move in Trump's direction? That gives us a clue as to what we can do coming up. You see, because it's not all money. I'm going to point out a couple of things, but the fact is many of the candidates that had more money lost in 2018. Money just can't buy you love. You know, it's just it's not the guarantee, but money does help. Trump was outspent, 1.4 billion versus 957 million. Trump should have lost just based upon the money, but he spent the money wisely. He had the best marketing. He outmarketed Hillary. He did a better job in organizing the ground game, and he had the secret weapon we're going to talk about in a second. But with that, he used the money smart. He didn't waste it on useless TV that had little impact. He didn't waste it on things that wasn't accountable. He concentrated on texting. He concentrated on digital media. He concentrated on very select, carefully chosen direct mail. And he did it in such a way that he outdid Hillary completely. In fact, his digital marketing manager, who was just wiped out Hillary's team in his brilliance, has now become Trump's campaign manager for 2020. But here's what happened. After Trump won, there became this organized resistance. And all over the United States, there were small groups of people who were organizing around this report called Indivisible. And this Indivisible became the Bible for how to organize and how to win in 2018. This Indivisible is still relevant today. Everybody watching this seminar, they should get this booklet, Indivisible. It's easy, quick read, and I will send it to everyone who has signed up for this webinar. If you're watching this webinar and you didn't sign up for it, email me at craig@craighuey.com, and I will send you a copy of Indivisible. And what it did, it told people exactly how to organize and how to win in 2018. And they were so effective in mobilization. And what it taught was the formula. You take the money, you get the right data, you get organized GOTV, get out the vote, and you have a victory. So I understand that from having a marketing and advertising background all my life. So, we do these marketing and advertising campaigns for clients. And I decided in 2011, in a special election, an impossible race, to run for Congress when Jane Harman decided not to run. So she had won the race. She dropped out after the Republicans took over because she would have been pretty irrelevant. So all of a sudden, the Secretary of State of California and the most powerful councilwoman and Democrat family were running, along with a bunch of Republicans, a bunch of other Democrats. It was a huge race. And there's no way a Republican could win in the district I ran in. Should lose by 30, 40,000 votes. Well, I almost won. I just had to shift a couple of thousand votes, and I would have won. I shocked everybody because I won the primary. I beat California's Secretary of State. I was running, and something strange happened to me. I was running. I go to a restaurant. I go to the market. I go to a church, and people would come up to me and said, I talked to somebody, either on the phone or in person, for 25, 30 minutes. And they knew all about me. They knew that my number one issue was gun control. My number one issue was life, or my number one issue was the economy. They knew the prospect. They had a profile of them. And they knew my positions, and they knew how to talk to Republicans. They knew how to talk to Democrats, and they knew how to talk to independents. And they were identifying who the persuadables were identifying who those were in agreement and who were their opposition. And they were collecting data. And we couldn't understand what these calls were. And my consultant said, this is simply a push-pull. Don't worry about it. Well, on the day after the election, the Los Angeles Times said that President Obama's group, Organizing for America, had 1,500 summer organizers come into the congressional area to do the campaign and to do that formula. They had 12,000 applicants, and they only had funding for 1,500. 1,500 is an army. 1,500 hours were worked. 410,000 live calls in the final 20 days were made. 41 phone banks. It was incredible. And using the most advanced marketing, digital marketing, and combining it with the data. So they took the money, they took the data, they had the targeted advertising, and then they tied it to a ground game of going door to door and getting people out to vote. And my opponent had their victory. And all of a sudden I said, oh my gosh, I understand what they did. Nobody ever talked to us about it. Nobody ever told us it could happen. And what the Los Angeles Times said is that Obama, who had perfected in 2008 marketing that completely wiped out McCain, that he then was afraid about what was going to happen in 2012. So he repped up his whole campaign, brought in people from Silicon Valley, from Facebook, from Microsoft, all these different people to develop the most advanced campaign possible, mobilized and trained people, and brought them into the district as a test campaign. And when I saw what happened, that's when I said, now I get it. And see, these groups understand this, where most Republican, conservative, and Christian groups have no clue. Organizing for America right now has 32,000 agitators, 5 million people on its list. They have 13 million email addresses. They are well financed. Then they do Community Organizing Institute. They do all kinds of seminars, webinars. Of course, there's the Democratic National Committee War Room, Priorities USA, Center for American Progress, Latino Victory Fund, and many more that, just like OFA, have put together campaigns for victory that are very powerful. And what happened? Well, for example, Congressman Dana Rohrabacher. Congressman Rohrabacher has been a consistent conservative. He has fought hard to expand freedom, to oppose tyranny overseas, to reduce the size of government. He's been an advocate for individual freedom. And Dana Rohrabacher has been a champion for Christians. You know, he alone stood up in Congress and fought hard for the Save the Christians from Genocide bill, to be able to save the Christians being persecuted in the Middle East. And just recently, some 450 pastors in China have signed a protest letter to the Communist Chinese government for tearing down churches, locking up Christians, for persecuting Christians. And he's been like the lone voice in Congress standing up for the Chinese Christians. Well, he was wiped out on Election Day. He's been in office since the 1990s, wiped out in what has historically been a Republican district. Why did that happen? How could it happen? Well, let's go back to this whole thing that took place. First of all, we've got the problem. Many of you have seen the TV commercials by Tom Steyer on impeach Trump. You know, Steyer is running for president, and you know, he basically created a campaign of paid volunteers and door knocking. He put money into direct mail. He put money into phone calls. He put money into texting. He created an incredible organization, and he put $150 million into targeted races. So he selected out who he wanted to defeat. He had the money. He created the data and the targeted marketing. He organized people into get out the vote. So they were on the phone, but mainly went door to door, found out who was against, like Congressman Rohrabacher, who wasn't sure and who was for it, and then worked those people who weren't sure to convince them to go against Rohrabacher, made sure they went out, and then he took Rohrabacher and he marginalized him, attacked him, tried to demoralize him with Republicans, and he was able to get victory. Now, Tom Steyer, incidentally, is running for president. He's already put 6 figures into ad campaigns on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and Instagram. He just came out with a full-page ad in USA Today and other papers, and he's done 2 town hall meetings. He's got 3 more to go in key states, and he's running on this position: 5 rights. 1, the right to equal vote. 2, the right to clean air and water. 3, the right to free pre-K and college. 4, the right to a living wage. And 5, a right to free health care. And he, with that TV commercial, has gathered 6 million names. And then with the 2018 election, he's got a whole organization built up of volunteers and paid staff, and a strategy at how to do 2020. So a lot of people are laughing, well, you know, he's never held office. Remember, President Trump never held office before. He's got a lot of people laughing because there's some big names running for president, but none have the advantages If he's smart, he'll take advantage of his advantages. For example, Next Gen was his campaign for 2018. He spent $3.8 million. He had a staff on the ground of 68 people. I can't emphasize how important that staff on the ground to coordinate the volunteers. He had, and this is just the primary, he had 990 volunteers as of June 2018. We don't have the actual figures for November. And he took this Next Gen and went to college campuses. And this was primarily on college campuses. He had other programs for other segments, but this is college campuses. And so he had 20. And he was able to register 28,766 college kids by June. He was able to get pledge cards from 31,465. Pledge cards are one of the strategies that the Democrats use, that when people sign a pledge card to vote, then they're followed up, and then they're told, well, after the election, I'm going to see how it went, and since you made your pledge, they feel morally and ethically obligated to vote. And then total young voters reached with his ads 490,000. Total doors knocked on of college dorms and college addresses of kids, 83,000. Total text sent, 689,000. Total pieces of direct mail sent to the college students, 1.6 million pieces. And what did he do? He targeted the races where the Republicans lost. He was purposeful. He did it right, and he was successful. It was a progressive army. And then he also had Need to Vote initiative, which is the impeachment. That's what got people riled up, but that wasn't why people were going door to door in what they're saying. It was only part of why they were so riled up. What were the key issues? College affordability, pre-existing conditions. And he doubled the youth vote over 2014 in June. He tripled the vote in targeted area over 2014, and the select colleges 10 times the youth vote over 2014. Now, 65% were Hispanic kids, 200,000 were extra voters who had never voted before. See, this is the type of thing that's happening that the Republicans have failed to go out and register. The Republicans have failed to target their audiences. I'm going to show you how that can be turned around in just a second. Uniting California. Now, this happened in other states as well. Texas, Arizona, in Wisconsin, in Florida, in Pennsylvania, in Minnesota. States that had races that were very close, they had a similar type of thing. So this Uniting California was a lot of the progressive groups joining in together, creating 1,700 volunteers, an army. They went to 580,000 doors, 190,000 calls, 350,000 reach conversation, a 10% increase in turnout over the district average because of this campaign. You see, it wasn't, oh my gosh, they don't like Trump. That wasn't the issue. It wasn't, oh my gosh, that it was something to do with not liking Republicans. It wasn't something that the Republicans said. It wasn't simply because the media was out there bashing Trump. It wasn't that there was just a little bit of voter fraud here and there that was going on. This was a massive organized effort that wiped out the Republicans, and they planned to do it in 2020. Now, the warning was ignored. I've been talking about this at 2016 election. I started giving a speech on how the progressives plan to win in 2018. I wrote it in my newsletter, Reality Alert, in my newsletter, Huey Report, articles. I conducted boot camps for millennials. I conducted boot camps for candidates and for pastors. And when we didn't do enough of these boot camps because we didn't have enough funding to be able to do them, but we tried to train them and show them about this. Now, Netroot Nations is just one of the organizations. Let me tell you what they do. So Netroot Nations, they have a variety of things, but one of the things they do is they gather together groups of basically millennials. And millennials sign up for it, and a few are selected, and then they're trained for a week. Now, my training usually is a weekend or one day. They train for a whole week. And whether they train them about the basics of advertising and marketing in a campaign. They train them about how to do the GOTV. They talk to them about data. They talk to them about it. And what they do is they break the kids into a group of maybe 10 kids. And those 10 kids then strategize on a campaign and come up with a campaign plan. And then it's all critiqued by professionals, what they've come up with. And they perfect these organizers, community organizers. And then the person who's gone to this camp, they pledge to go to a candidate for a state senate or a state assembly or for governor or whatever for a year, to work for them for a year. And then the campaigns get a trained group of people that is completely free of the consultants who tried to hold the candidates back 10, 15 years based upon old strategies. And this is why so many of the Republicans lose, is because they hire the consultants that don't understand digital. They don't understand targeting. They're not into understanding how to get out the vote. So the consultant class goes back to a year 2000 mentality. Back when, you call the internet a machine. Back to when, a digital ad meant very little and had little impact. So many of the campaigns failed to do modern marketing. They failed to do the proven formula: money plus targeted digital marketing plus organized GOTV and getting out the victory. So you've got to have this. You got to have this in place. And if you're going to be looking to advise a candidate, if you're going to be running for an office, if you're a pastor and you're taking a look at people in your fellowship who want to run for an office, they have to understand this. They can't just run thinking, oh, I'm going to win. They need to do it strategically. Voter turnout mobilization is the key. You have the right data strategy of supporters, persuadables, and the opposition, and you know what to do with it. You create that database. That's what they did in this blue wave. Then you get the targeted direct mail based on data, plus advanced digital marketing involving texting and advanced pre-rolls where you have commercials before people see a TV commercial. You are able to do lookalike audiences. Now, all this, when you do geofencing, I'll talk about geofencing in a second. All of this is in an article that I'd be glad to send to you. Just let me know. It's on political direct marketing. And then they got the volunteers and the paid workers, the ground game. And then they start off by registering people to vote. And of course, in some states like California, it's same-day registration now. And then ultimately, almost every state will be same-day registration. And they find out who's with them, and they register them to vote. Then once they register them to vote, they have a vote-by-mail strategy. How do we get people to sign up this vote-by-mail ballot? They do it all the way from the moment that ballot hits the person's home up to the last day, and they have a strategy for that. And then on the last day, they have the ballot harvesting. And this is what's gotten people's attention. Oh, it's fraud. I got so many emails. It's fraudulent. No, ballot harvesting is smart marketing. And the Republicans were asleep at the wheel. And anybody could do it. So what is ballot harvesting? Well, here's what it is. Ballot harvesting is where somebody can go to a house and ask the person to fill out their ballot, seal that ballot, sign it, give it to them, and they will take it to the voter registration office, or they'll take it to the poll. Now that is what ballot harvesting strategy is. It's to find as many people as you can and get them to go to the poll. And the fact is, they have perfected it. They've learned a lot, and they're going to perfect it more. And the Republicans are asleep. Now, 18 states have outlawed ballot harvesting, but like in Arizona, the Democrats still used it, even though it was outlawed, and it helped the Democrat senator get elected in what should have been a Republican seat. And a lot of congressional candidates and state legislative candidates in Arizona lost that should have won. But the Republicans sometimes understand it too. In North Carolina, there's a Republican who used it, and it's illegal in North Carolina. And he may lose his congressional race that he won because he used harvest. And is it voter fraud? Well, here's the problem with ballot harvesting. The person who does the ballot harvesting, they're unaccountable. There's no way of knowing who they are. There's no way of knowing if they fooled with the ballot. Ballot harvesting, the problem is, and why some states outlaw it, is that you can, instead of the person himself going to the polling booth or having a family member going to the polling booth, anybody can knock on the doors. So what happened is that many households had 4 or 5, 6 times somebody would come to their house. Many times that people would gather 200, 300, 400 of these ballots and take them to the voter registration. Now, what we don't know is vote buying. In many cases, the Latino Victory Fund and others would hold potlucks and events to get people to register to vote. And then they would do the same thing to get people to sign their ballot and hand it in. Is that vote buying? Technically, no, but you could entice somebody to do it, and somebody to fill out their ballot or just give you their ballot signed. Somebody else fills it out, and then this person's bringing it in, and nobody knows for sure that that person really made that vote. It could be vote coercion. This has been something that the unions have done, trying to put the pressure to vote a certain way, even if the union member doesn't care. Well, now it's gone to a higher level where the union can collect the ballots. And so they collected the ballots when before it would be a family member who would have to turn it in if it wasn't mailed in. They don't have to worry about trying to force somebody to mail it in. They can just pick it up and send it in. And so vote coercion, vote deception. This is where you get the ballot, you say you turn it in, but you change the ballot results. Since the person's unidentified who turns it in, since there's no accountability to trace it back, you have no way of knowing. And then there's always been Grammy farming. Grammy farming is something that the Democrats have perfected by going to nursing homes and getting people to fill out their vote by mail ballot, but they have to mail it in. Well, now with Grammy farming, one person can go in, get the ballot signed, and collect them all and just take them over to the voter registration. And then, of course, there's always theoretically the no-shows where on election day, you can see who voted and who didn't vote. And then you can somehow have a copy of the signatures or try to forge signatures and hope that they go through. In other words, ballot harvesting as a means of being able to try to get people to make it easier for people to vote, and that's the rationale behind it, opens up the more voter fraud. And instead of having voter ID and making sure that all the votes are honest, it now makes it even more suspect. Now, I'm not saying, and I'm very sure that it wasn't so much these different issues of fraud that caused the win of the election. It was simply ballot harvesting done right. And it got 6 to 10% more increase in voter turnout than before. 6 to 10% would get anybody a win in the election in almost any district. And here's the thing, it's not new. It's something that's gone on for many years in many states. In California, it was a couple of years ago that Jerry Brown signed it, and it was going on in elections from that point on. So what happened in 2018 had happened in June. It had happened in previous elections. It was not something that was a surprise. It was something that the consultants didn't know what to do. The candidates ignored it, but the Democrats and the progressives, they paid attention to it. Just take a look in California. 39 Democrats and 14 Republicans in 2006, 45 Democrats and 8 Republicans in 2019 to 20. We lost 6 good candidates. State Assembly, we lost 5 that we shouldn't have lost. And State Senate, we're down 2. But that doesn't even show the races where we could have won, but because of the ballot harvesting, the Republican that could have won lost. And so terrible results. So with the ballot harvesting and the unions, the progressives, they have perfected this. If the Republicans don't pick it up, if conservatives don't understand it, if the churches don't get engaged, all the different races will lose. Let's just take the California Superintendent of Instruction because it's such a great example. You had the California Teachers Association's Tony Thurmond running against Marshall Tuck, who's represented by the charter schools. Both are Democrats. In California, they had the top 2. Well, those were the top 2. The Republican didn't even make it. And in those top 2, Marshall Tuck, he had more of a conservative worldview. He was for homeschooling. He was for private schools. He was for charter schools. He would even believe that you should have religious Christmas songs in public school. Tony Thurmond, just the opposite. Well, $6 per voter was spent. 2 to 1 of the money raised and spent was for Marshall Tuck. Tuck outspent Tony Thurmond, but you know who won? Tony Thurmond, because money can't buy you love. You see, Tony Thurmond lost with a lot less money because he used the ballot harvesting that took place to have people vote for him in down ticket. Yes, there's voter fraud. Yes, there's different ways it's happening. Motor voter, unions, acorn type effects, online registration, all these are things that are problems, but that's not why Republicans lost. They lost because of what happened with the harvesting, ballot harvesting. So the big money, and this is an example of what I talked about with the big money as being one of the dangers. This is all in one day. All this money went from these business groups to the Democratic Party, nothing to the Republicans. So what's the reaction? Is it the death of the GOP? That's what many say. It's the death of the GOP. GOP should change to anti-Trump. GOP should become more liberal. Maybe there should be a third party to challenge the GOP. In California, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Chet Mays and Christine Olsen have talked about the new wave. If the Republican Party doesn't conform to their moderate liberal point of view, then there should be a third party against the Republican Party. All this is craziness. And but it will be the death of the GOP if they don't learn the formula and they don't get down how to do modern marketing. So we have to make sure that we have a message that does not compromise. We need to make sure that there's money and targeted data and organized GOTV, and that means victory. That means there needs to be training. And if you're interested in going to one of our boot camps or you're interested in groups that do train, let me know. We need to have organization for the campaigns so they have a just as powerful as the progressives, an organization of getting out the vote. We need to have the most advanced data marketing, most advanced direct mail based upon right data, and have that strategy. And we got to make sure that as the redistricting fights happen, that people like you who are listening get involved in making sure that the redistricting is not unfair. So here's a little secret. Conservative and Republicans usually do better in the midterms. Now, it's true that the incumbent party usually loses in the midterms. But it's also true that conservatives and Republicans often do better in the midterms, but not this time. And it goes back to the ballot harvesting. That's the key. So we have an uphill battle. Now, one of the things has to do with California. I'm hoping nationally the GOP, Trump all the way down, looks at making California a battleground. Gavin Newsom says, so goes California, so goes the nation. But in California, there's a single party rule. In California, there's only 24% of registered Republican, but that's 4.7 million. That's more than most states. The voter trend, in California is same day registration, vote by mail only, the corrupt covered California getting out the vote, the unions getting out the vote, the ballot harvesting. All of those are issues that have to be taken care of. And then election 2020. In California, if, take a look, if you're thinking about running for an office, now's the time to begin. In California, the filing is September 12th to the end of December just to run for an office. That's just, a year away, less than a year away. And the primary is going to, in California, is the second week of March. Every state's going to be different. Your state's going to be different, but you can see it's coming up fast. So turning this around, the answer is here in this audience. Number one, we need to communicate our issues. And, the progressives don't have the answer. The progressives are like in that disconnect from reality. But we have the answer. We have the solutions. We can talk about economic boom. We can talk about jobs. We can talk about income raises. But then we have issues with the economy that have to be dealt with, such as the deficit. We have the whole issue of taxes and costs of living. And the second part is the revitalization of the Republican Party. Now, again, what party is in the opposition to the progressives, which dominate the Democratic Party? It's the Republican Party. So how do you revitalize the Republican Party? Well, just take a look at Democrat state conventions all over the United States. What do? They target and train people on how to win elections. Most Republican conventions talk about who's going to win the state party chairman. They don't train, they don't organize, they don't get the people involved. We need to identify the key issues. We need to, number one, talk about healthcare and costs, because that's on people's mind. That's going to be used against us in 2020. We need to talk about government mismanagement. Here in California, the wildfires, the water shortage is the issue, but in every state, it's government mismanagement. We need to limit and reduce taxes. We need to fight for school choice, stop predator teachers, fight for parental rights, stop forced vaccination, stop labor spending in politics, protect free speech on college campuses, stop the bloated government fraud, fix our roads now, and fight against civil asset forfeiture, fight for criminal justice reform, right to protect yourselves and others, religious freedom, stop frivolous lawsuits, privacy now, pension reform, and stop the judicial activism. All these are issues that we should be running on and not shying from. The third solution is stopping the deep state. Now, we've had a setback with the House being taken over, but I'm going to do a separate webinar shortly on the deep state. This is all found in my book, The Deep State, 15 Surprising Dangers You Should Know. So I hope everybody listening will get that book and learn what the deep state is, learn how it's this unelected political class that is destroying our society and destroying America. It talks about, this corruption cover-up that's ahead. We have agencies with abuse of power. We have the Mueller investigation abuse. We have FISA abuse, election abuse, a variety of things. Incidentally, in the book, I go into voter fraud and go into the war on Christianity. But with the deep state, it's manipulating public policy. It's sabotaging, delays. It's leaks. It's half-truths. And it's got to stop. And with the resistance within, it's all to tear down anything good Donald Trump does. It's designed to have the White House weaponize government agencies. For example, in the EPA, Ryan Zinke points out that 1/3 of the employees are in active opposition to the policies that he's instituted. We see in FEMA attacking churches and Trump having to step in. It's so out of control. And of course, we got the whole thing with the politicization of the intelligence agencies. All of these are working against us in 2020 because you have the deep state that's going to be at work. And then we have the problem with the media bias. National media is about 90% against conservatives, against Trump, against Christians, against libertarians. The local media is no better. You have, in fact, in some channels, even more of a constant stream of progressive anti-Trump activity on the local level. Google's continuing to do its censorship, Facebook censorship, YouTube censorship, even Amazon and Twitter censorship. And that will accelerate in 2020. We've got to be prepared for it. The government schools are training kids to get out and be progressives. We got to stop that. And then we need to act, to do as if, it was 2020. So many times I speak at groups and organizations, and they're living in the past. They're living as, all we have to do is present our ideas. All we have to do is say the right things and get the word out. No, you got to build a database. You got to do the digital. You have to get out the vote with those in combination. And then also I would recommend church election forms and voter guides and globalization and mobilizing the Christian vote. So, we need to do what the left does. Branding and positioning. What the Democratic Party and the progressives are, they concentrate on branding and positioning. Republican Party, they don't. Who are the spokesmen? Candidates needed who get it right are needed, not the consultants. And we need to be able to do the most modern thing. I was given a gift to do an experiment. Now we have to do more of this experiment. That was powerful. It's called geofencing. And we have to use these tools because the progressives use it. What's geofencing? I went back to people in some of the churches. I picked out about 40 churches. And I picked out all the people who went to those churches in the last 5 weeks. And with geofencing, I was able to identify who those were who went to those churches. And with $21,000 in gathering that data and doing Facebook and YouTube pre-roll commercials, we had 942,000 impressions. That it shouldn't have the dollar sign. 942,000 impressions and 288,000 video views. We targeted the church audience for hardly any money. And if you'd like to help me continue to work in that area, send me an email at craig@craighuey.com, and we'll work on that together. But we need to be able to do this because there is a war on Christianity that's going on. And with this war on Christianity, That's where the evangelical vote is so critical. There's 80 million potential evangelical voters, but only 35 to 45%, 35 to 45% are not registered. 45 to 55% don't even vote. So in 2016, 52% didn't vote, 43% voted. What about 2018? It was less Christians that voted. In California alone, the blue state, 7.2 million Christians did not vote. 6.7 million did out of 14 million Christians. You see, Congressman Dana Rohrabacher I talked about, I tried to get into 2 churches in his district to be able to speak, to be able to talk to enough voters who would have had him win the election. Out of all the churches in his district, none allowed me to come in and talk to their fellowships. The pastors were not engaged. In 2016, with President Trump, he proved that you don't have to match dollars or you don't need to outspend efforts. You don't have to rely upon TV commercials. You don't have to water down messages. And that he proved that evangelicals will vote. You see, it was the evangelicals that went out. It was pastors in the churches who got people to register to vote. It was the pastors in the churches who got people volunteered to go door to door. And they got the people in their churches out to vote. What we need to do is have people registering to vote in these churches. We need to be able to get that registration up. We'll win at the city council level. We'll win at the assembly and state senate race. We'll win at the Congress, state offices, governor's race, senate race. We'll win at the presidency. If we, even in blue states, if we got the Christians out to vote. And it's key to being able to win an election. And that is key. So when Christians, for example, when I go to a church and I talk about Israel and I talk about abortion and I talk about the persecuted church and I talk about these issues, there's non-negotiables that Christians all agree with. They may disagree on healthcare, but they agree on Israel and they agree on Christian civil liberties. And that's how you identify the judges, the propositions, the Congress, the Senate, the different candidates to be able to win an election. When Christians hear about the attacks on religious freedom, they're ready to vote. But that's where the churches have to get people out. Just in California, I spoke to close to 1,500 pastors in this last election. They didn't really know what to do, but they were wakened up for the first time because of the ban on the Bible bill that's going to be brought back in January here in California, stopping homeschooling bill and attacks on Christian colleges, all these different family issues. The pastors are waking up. Well, now, 2020, the pastors have to take that waking up and turn it into action. Because the Middle East, the historic genocide that's going on, attack on Christians, this is being identified by the State Department, by Sam Brownback, our ambassador of religious liberty, by Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, and Mike Pence, the Vice President. All these are trying to push the protection of religious minorities worldwide. That's had a setback because of the loss of the House. But that is still on the agenda, and that's what Christians need to know about. But here's the thing. Evangelical vote averages at 26% of all voters. In 2014, 78% of the Christians went for the Republicans. In 2016, 81% went for Republicans. That's the highest number ever. In 2018, it dropped down to 75%. You see, there was less Christians voting Republican this time than last time. That's because of lack of understanding of the key issues. And remember that 26%? Well, here's the thing. 26% of the vote in 2018 was evangelical. 26% was Catholic, 2% Jewish, 17% unknown. But here's the thing, the evangelical raw numbers went down because less people voted in the midterm than in 2016. So millions of Christians who voted in 2016 did not vote in 2018. And then another million basically voted more progressive than from a conservative Christian worldview. So what do? 2020, we got to make sure we have voter guides. 90% of the Christians use the voter guides to be able to know how to vote their values. And if you'd like to be able to make sure your state has a voter guide, we need financial support to be able to do that. But we want to see a voter guide in every state, and we want to see millions of people using it. We can't rely upon all these slate mailings that are fraudulent. So we can't choose silence. We can't choose condemnation. We got to choose courage in the coming months. And so I hope this webinar was helpful. I hope this gave you an insight of what needs to take place. We want to make America great again. Well, we've got a lot to do. And so I encourage you, read my newsletter, Reality Alert, or my for evangelical Christians, or Huey Report for free market, conservative politics, libertarian politics. Keep informed, then commit yourself. Some of you have financial resources that can be used. I'd like to talk to you about that. Others of you throughout the United States, you may want to know how you can personally get involved in running for an office. I'd like to talk to you about that. Maybe you'd like to help in the campaign. I can direct you, and I can help you know how to train so you can do the ballot harvesting, so you know how to do these different things. And we can win in 2020 if we do them. If we don't do them, we won't. Well, thanks so much for participating in this webinar. Appreciate it. And if you have any questions, be sure to let me know. I'd also appreciate if you write a review on Amazon for my book, The Deep State. Go ahead to Deep State, or go to deepstatebook.com. I'll be glad to personally sign the book for you. And I think you'll enjoy it, especially you'll enjoy on the Deep State, better understanding of what's going on, including voter fraud, the war on Christianity, and what the Deep State really is. Thanks so much. God bless you.